He told himself he wouldn't turn back again. Not for anyone. Not for anything. Not even for the sound that didn't belong to the wind. The storm howled across the frozen plain, dragging needles of ice against Ethan Cole's visor as his boots sank 6 inches into the powder with every step. The HUD in the corner of his vision blinking steady warnings. Temperature minus 62 degrees Fahrenheit. Suit integrity at 81%. Power reserves slowly bleeding out 1 decimal at a time. Everything about this world was designed to erase you quietly. The wreck behind him was already disappearing, half buried under drifting white. Its twisted frame just another shape in the endless cold. And that was fine by him, because anything tied to it was something he had already decided to leave behind. He moved forward with purpose, each breath measured, each step deliberate, the rhythm of survival drilled too deep to question, because hesitation got people killed and memory got people worse. A faint sound slipped through the storm again, barely there, thin as a cracked signal, and Ethan stopped for half a second before forcing himself forward, jaw tightening, as if the motion alone could silence it. Not wind, not mechanical, something else. His suit registered no life signs nearby, just static interference dancing across the scan, the kind that made ghosts out of nothing and nothing out of something. And he trusted the numbers more than instinct, always had. The ground dipped ahead, a shallow ridge cutting through the ice like a scar, and that's where he saw it. No, her, half encased in frost, a shape too deliberate to be debris, too still to be anything but trouble. He slowed, boots crunching softer now, breath fogging the inside of his visor despite the filtration system struggling to keep up. And for a moment, he just stood there, looking. Blue. That was the first thing he noticed. Skin like pale cobalt under the ice, faintly luminous even in the storm's dim gray light. Strands of silver hair frozen against her face, eyes open but unfocused, as if she had been staring at the sky long before he arrived. Not human, not even close. The translator in his suit flickered. Uselessly, unable to lock onto a language or signal, leaving only silence between them. Ethan exhaled slowly, the sound loud in his own ears, and glanced at his HUD again. Power at 68% now, margins tightening, every second here costing him distance he couldn't afford. He knew the scenario. He knew the outcome. You stop, you help, you lose time, you lose heat, you lose the edge, and eventually you lose yourself. His hand flexed at his side, fingers brushing the edge of his thermal pack, already calculating what it would take, what it would cost, what it would mean. Her eyes shifted, barely, just enough to meet his, and there was no fear there, no plea, just awareness, quiet and unblinking, like she had already accepted whatever came next. Ethan held that gaze for a second too long, something tightening in his chest that had nothing to do with the cold, and then he looked away, turning his body back toward the horizon where survival waited in straight lines and hard choices. He took one step, then another. The storm swallowed the space between them almost instantly, erasing her outline from view as if she had never been there at all, and that should have made it easier, should have made it final. But the sound came again, softer now, fading, and somehow heavier than before. Ethan clenched his jaw and kept walking. The wind did not fade when he walked away, but something else did, something quieter, something that should have stayed buried under years of decisions he refused to revisit. And yet it followed him, step for step, like a second shadow he could not see but could feel pressing against the back of his thoughts. Ethan kept moving, forcing a steady pace, each boot fall measured at roughly 30 inches apart, conserving energy the way training demanded, his breathing slow and controlled, but the numbers on his display refused to cooperate. The power drain ticking down faster than expected as the storm thickened, static interference crawling across the screen like a living thing. He adjusted the thermal regulator, shaving off a few degrees of internal comfort to buy time, and told himself that was all that mattered. Time and distance, nothing. Behind him, nothing worth turning around for. The sound came again, faint, almost imagined, and he shut it out by focusing on the mechanics, on the small details that did not ask questions, the pressure seals in his gloves, the slight stiffness in his left knee joint, the way the wind shifted direction every few seconds like it was searching for him. A flicker crossed his HUD, a ghost reading, something trying to resolve into a signal, and for a moment he almost ignored it, almost let it pass the same way he had let everything else pass. But it stabilized just long enough to form a pattern, a heartbeat, weak and irregular, but undeniably there. He cursed under his breath and reached up, tapping the side of his helmet as if that could change what he was seeing, but the numbers held steady, a life sign at the edge of range, fading. Not his problem, he told himself, not anymore, and he kept walking, one step, then another, pushing harder now, boots cutting deeper into the snow as if speed alone could outrun the thought forming in the back of his mind. It did not work. It never worked. The ridge ahead offered partial cover, a narrow break in the terrain where the wind might ease just enough to let him recalibrate, and he angled toward it, calculating angles and exposure, pretending that was the reason his path curved slightly, pretending it had nothing to do with the direction he had come from. The storm roared louder, drowning everything, and for a brief second there was nothing but white and sound and the steady thud of his pulse in his ears. And then, just as suddenly, there was silence. Not real silence, but the kind that settles inside you when something shifts. He stopped. Completely. The world did not change. The wind still screamed. The cold still bit through every layer. But inside his helmet, inside his head, something went still, like a line had been drawn, and he had just crossed it without meaning to. His hand tightened into a fist, the glove creaking softly, and he looked down at the power readout again. 62% now. Margins narrowing to the point where mistakes turned fatal, and he knew exactly what turning back would mean. Less distance. Less heat. Less chance. He knew all of it, and that was the problem, because knowing did not make the decision easier. It only made it clearer. Ethan exhaled slowly, the sound fogging his visor for a split second, and then he turned his head, just slightly, enough to glance over his shoulder into the storm that had already erased his tracks. Nothing was visible, nothing at all, just endless white swallowing everything equally. And yet he could still see her in his mind, the way her eyes had not asked for anything, the way she had simply existed in that moment without expectation. He let out a low breath that almost turned into a laugh, humorless and sharp, and shook his head once as if to reset himself. But the movement did not clear anything. It only confirmed what he already knew. He had walked away before. He had done exactly this, chosen survival, chosen distance, chosen the version of himself that did not look back. And he had lived with that choice ever since. Lived, but not cleanly. His boots shifted in the snow as he pivoted, slow at first, then with more certainty, until he was facing the direction he had just come from, the storm hitting him head-on now, harsher, colder, like it was testing him. He stood there for a second, maybe two, letting the wind press against him, letting the numbers on his display tick down another fraction, and then he started walking back, each step heavier than the last, not because of the snow, but because of what it meant. The storm did not welcome him back. It pressed harder, colder, as if the planet itself rejected the reversal, but Ethan Cole kept moving into it, head lowered, shoulders squared, each step carving through resistance that felt thicker now, heavier, like the distance he had created in minutes had somehow stretched into something far greater. His HUD flickered with every gust, the interference spiking as he retraced his path, power dropping to 59%, then 58%, the numbers steady and unforgiving, each one a reminder that turning back had already cost him more than he could afford. He ignored it, not because it did not matter, but because it did, and that made it simpler in a way he did not want to examine. The ridge appeared again through the shifting white, barely visible, just a darker distortion in the storm, and he angled toward it with practiced precision, cutting across his previous trajectory, trusting instinct over instruments when the instruments began to lie. The sound returned, clearer now, not a voice, not a word, just a fragile rhythm, uneven and fading, but still there, still real, and that was enough. He increased his pace despite the drag of the snow, boots sinking deeper, muscles burning under the suit as the servos compensated with a faint mechanical hum that echoed through his frame. The wind shifted suddenly, opening a narrow corridor of visibility, and for a brief second the world sharpened, edges forming out of chaos, and there she was again, exactly where he had left her, half buried, half forgotten, the ice creeping higher along her form as if time itself had been working against her in his absence. He slowed as he approached, not out of caution, but something else, something quieter, the same hesitation that had made him stop before, but different now, heavier, anchored in the knowledge of what came next. Her eyes moved when he came into view, just slightly, enough to register him, enough to confirm that she had not imagined his existence. And there was still no fear there, no accusation, only that same steady awareness, like she had expected nothing and still received exactly that. Ethan crouched down beside her, the snow crunching under his weight, his gloved hand hovering for a second before settling against the ice encasing her shoulder, the cold biting even through the suit as the thermal sensors flared in warning. Surface temperature critical, the HUD flashed, and he muted it with a sharp tap, focusing instead on the physical, on the way the frost had fused with her skin without breaking it, on the shallow rise and fall that marked her breathing, faint but present. He reached for the multi-tool at his belt and activated the low-heat cutter, a thin line of controlled warmth designed for precision, not speed, and began tracing along the edges of the ice, careful, methodical, each movement deliberate as the frozen layer softened just enough to crack and separate without causing further damage. The process was slow, too slow, and he knew it, could feel the seconds slipping through his grasp as surely as the heat bled from his suit. But rushing would only make things worse, and worse was not an option he was willing to accept anymore. A soft sound escaped her, barely audible, more breath than voice, and he paused for a fraction of a second, glancing up to meet her gaze, close now, clearer than before, the faint glow in her eyes reflecting off his visor like distant stars. He did not understand her, not her language, not her kind, not any of it, but he understood that she was still here, still holding on in a way that did not make sense in a world like this, and that was enough. Ethan exhaled slowly and went back to work, the cutter humming softly as it carved through the last of the ice, binding her upper body, freeing one arm, then the other, the frost breaking away in small shards that the wind immediately claimed. Power at 54%, the HUD whispered, and he ignored it again, shifting his position to slide one arm carefully behind her shoulders, testing the weight, the balance, the reality of what he was about to do. She was lighter than he expected, or maybe he was stronger than he felt. The difference did not matter as he lifted her slowly, keeping her close to conserve heat, the suit compensating with a software as it adjusted to the added load. For a moment, just a moment, everything narrowed to that single point of contact, the fragile warmth against the relentless cold, and Ethan understood with a clarity that surprised him that turning back had never been about saving her. It had been about refusing to leave something alive to disappear into the silence without a witness. The weight settled against him in a way that felt both unfamiliar and inevitable, her body light but fragile in his arms, as if the storm itself had been holding her together and now expected him to take over. And Ethan adjusted his grip carefully, one arm supporting her shoulders, the other securing her against his chest, pulling her closer to share what little heat his suit could still provide. The wind struck them from the side, sharp and relentless, forcing him to angle his body to shield her, each step now slower, more deliberate, the 6-inch snow drifts feeling deeper with the added burden, the servos in his suit compensating with a low, steady hum that he could feel through his bones. His HUD pulsed again, power at 51%, then 50%, the numbers slipping in quiet increments that left no room for denial, and he knew exactly what it meant, the margin between survival and failure narrowing with every second he carried her. He scanned the terrain ahead, forcing focus, forcing logic back into place, because carrying her without a destination was not a plan, it was a delay, and delay did not end well out here. The ridge he had marked earlier came back into view, a shallow formation of rock breaking through the ice, offering just enough structure to block part of the wind if approached from the right angle, not shelter in the true sense, but better than open ground, and right now better was all he needed. He shifted his course slightly, recalculating distance, estimating roughly 400 yards through the storm, each yard costing him energy he could feel draining with every step, but stopping was not an option, not anymore. A faint movement against his chest drew his attention, her head shifting slightly, as if the motion of being carried had pulled her back toward awareness, and he glanced down, visor tint adjusting automatically to give him a clearer view of her face. Her eyes were open again, not fully, but enough to see him, to register the change, and there was something new there now, not fear, not relief, something quieter, something like confusion, as if the act itself did not fit into whatever understanding she had of the world. Her lips parted slightly, a small movement, and a soft sound followed, fragile and uneven, shaped like language, but not something his systems could translate. The signal too weak, too distorted, and he did not try to answer, did not try to interpret, because this was not about words. Ethan adjusted his grip again, tightening the hold just enough to keep her steady as he moved, the heat from his suit beginning to transfer slowly, deliberately, a controlled exchange that his systems flagged as inefficient but necessary, and he overrode the warning without hesitation. The wind shifted again, stronger this time, forcing him to stop for a brief second to regain balance, boots digging deeper into the snow as he leaned into it, using his body as a barrier between her and the worst of it. And in that moment of stillness he became aware of something else, something subtle, a faint warmth not entirely his own, a slight increase in temperature readings near his chest that did not match his suit output. He frowned slightly, glancing at the display, but the interference made it hard to isolate the source, the data flickering between readings that did not quite align, and he filed it away without understanding, without time to question it. The ridge was closer now, the dark outline sharper against the white, and he pushed forward with renewed focus, each step deliberate, each breath controlled, the rhythm of movement becoming the only thing that mattered. The storm did not ease, but the rock formation began to break the worst of it, the wind cutting around the edges instead of straight through, and when he finally reached the base, he turned his body sideways, positioning them in the narrow pocket of relative calm, lowering himself carefully to one knee before easing her down against the stone, keeping one arm around her to maintain contact. The surface was cold, unforgiving, but stable, and stability was something he could work with. He glanced at his HUD again, 47% now, the number lower than he wanted, higher than it should have been, and he knew he had traded distance for time, a choice that would demand something in return. Ethan exhaled slowly, the sound steady despite the strain, and adjusted the thermal pack on his back, already calculating the next step, already accepting that whatever came next would not be easy, because nothing about this decision had been. The narrow shelter did not feel like safety. It felt like a pause, the kind that exists only to measure what comes next, and Ethan Cole used every second of it with purpose, shifting his position against the rock to block the wind as much as possible, while pulling the thermal pack from his back with controlled movements, the clasp stiff from the cold, but still responsive under pressure. The pack hissed softly as he activated it, a low, steady release of stored heat designed for emergency conditions, and he brought it forward, placing it carefully between them, angling it so the warmth would distribute across both of their bodies instead of wasting itself into the air. His HUD pulsed again, power at 45% now, the drop sharper than before, and he knew the system was compensating for the increased thermal output, burning through reserves faster to keep them both above critical thresholds. He accepted that without hesitation, because the alternative was not something he allowed himself to calculate. Lyra shifted slightly against him, the movement small but deliberate, her breathing still shallow but more consistent than before, and he could feel the difference through the layers of his suit, a faint rhythm pressing back against his own, fragile but present. Her eyes opened a little wider this time, focusing with more clarity, the faint luminescence in them reflecting off the inside of his visor, and she studied him in silence, as if trying to understand not just what he was, but why he was still here. He did not break that gaze, not because he expected anything from it, but because looking away now would feel like undoing something he had already committed to. A soft sound left her again, more structured than before, the cadence of language beginning to form even if the meaning remained out of reach, and his translator flickered in response, attempting to process, to match patterns, but the interference still disrupted any real connection. He shook his head slightly, more to himself than to her, and adjusted the thermal pack again, ensuring the heat distribution remained stable, his gloved hand lingering for a moment near her shoulder to confirm that the warmth was taking effect. The temperature readings rose incrementally, slow but steady, enough to move her out of immediate danger, but not enough to guarantee anything beyond that. The storm outside shifted again, the sound changing pitch as the wind struck the rock at a different angle, and for a moment the relative calm of the pocket deepened, giving him a clearer sense of the environment beyond, the endless expanse still hostile, still indifferent, but slightly less immediate. He used that moment to scan again, sweeping the horizon through his visor, searching for anything that resembled a structure, a signal, a path forward that did not rely solely on endurance, but the interference remained too strong, the readings too inconsistent to form a reliable plan. Distance estimates fluctuated, markers shifting by hundreds of yards with each recalibration, and he knew he could not trust them completely, not out here, not in conditions like this. Lyra's hand moved then, a small, unsteady motion that caught his attention immediately, her fingers brushing lightly against the surface of his suit as if testing it, confirming that he was solid, real, not another illusion created by the storm. The contact was brief, barely there, but it carried a weight he did not expect, a simple acknowledgement that went beyond fear or gratitude, something closer to recognition. Ethan stilled for a second, then allowed his own hand to rest lightly against hers through the layers of material, not gripping, not restraining, just present, just enough to anchor the moment in something tangible. Her eyes softened slightly, the confusion still there, but now mixed with something else, something that resembled trust in its earliest, most fragile form. He exhaled slowly, the sound steady, and shifted his attention back to the problem at hand, because moments like this did not change the reality of their situation. Power continued to drop, 42% now, the margin tightening with every passing minute, and staying here too long would only delay the inevitable. Ethan looked out past the edge of the rock, into the storm that waited just beyond their temporary shelter, and knew that whatever came next would require movement, risk, and a decision he could not postpone much longer. He tightened his jaw slightly, the expression hidden behind the visor, and began preparing to move again, not because it was safe, but because it was necessary. The decision settled in quietly, without drama, without hesitation, just a shift in weight and intent as Ethan Cole secured the thermal pack tighter between them and recalibrated his suit for movement, knowing the next stretch would demand more than the last, knowing there would be no second shelter waiting if this one failed them. He glanced once more at the power readout, 40% now, the steady decline no longer alarming, just factual, just something to work around, and he adjusted his route in his mind, mapping the terrain based on what little he had seen before the storm closed in again, the ridge behind them, the shallow decline to the east, and somewhere beyond that, a geological anomaly his scanners had briefly picked up before interference swallowed the signal. It was not much, but it was direction, and direction was enough. He shifted his grip around Lyra, sliding one arm beneath her legs and the other across her back, lifting her again with controlled effort, the servos compensating immediately, though slower this time, strained by the extended load and dropping reserves. The wind hit them the moment they cleared the rock, sharper now, more aggressive, as if the brief calm had only been a warning, and Ethan leaned into it, angling his body to shield her again, every step deliberate, every movement calculated to minimize exposure while maintaining forward progress. The snow had hardened in places, crust forming over softer layers, making footing unpredictable, forcing him to adjust constantly, micro-corrections in balance that drained energy faster than speed ever could. Lyra shifted slightly in his arms, her head resting closer against his chest now, the faint warmth he had noticed before still present, more consistent this time, and his sensors picked it up again, a subtle increase localized around her core that did not match his suit output, something internal, something biological, and for the first time he considered the possibility that she was not just surviving his help, but contributing to it in ways he did not fully understand. Her eyes opened again as the wind howled around them, and this time she spoke more clearly, the sound still soft but more structured, a sequence of tones that carried intent even without translation, and his system flickered in response, struggling, then locking for a brief second before dropping again. He caught only fragments, incomplete, but enough to recognize repetition, a pattern directed at him, and he shook his head once, a small motion to signal the limitation, though he was not sure she understood. It did not seem to matter. She watched him instead, her gaze steady despite the conditions, and there was something in it now that had not been there before, not confusion, not uncertainty, but a quiet acceptance of his presence, as if she had recalibrated her understanding of him in real time. Ethan focused forward, pushing through the resistance, counting steps without thinking, a habit from years of movement in hostile environments, each 100 feet marked mentally, each shift in terrain noted and stored, building a map that existed only in his head because the one on his display could no longer be trusted. The anomaly he had seen earlier began to take shape through the storm, not a structure, but a depression in the land, a break in the otherwise flat expanse, where the snow seemed to swirl differently, pulled inward rather than pushed across, suggesting depth, suggesting potential cover. He angled toward it immediately, adjusting course with a slight pivot, conserving momentum as much as possible, his breathing steady but heavier now, each inhale drawing in filtered air that felt thinner than before. Power dropped again, 37%, then 36%, the numbers tightening into a range that left little room for error, and he knew that whatever waited ahead had to be enough, because there would not be another adjustment after this. Lyra's hand moved again, more deliberate this time, pressing lightly against his chest as if to anchor herself, or perhaps to steady him, and the contact lingered longer than before, the warmth from her touch distinct even through the layers of his suit. Ethan did not look down this time, did not break his focus, but he felt it, registered it. And something in his posture shifted subtly, not physically, but internally, a reinforcement of the decision he had already made. The depression grew clearer as they approached, the wind dipping slightly at its edges, the snow thinning just enough to reveal darker ground beneath. And for the first time since he had turned back, Ethan allowed himself to believe that this direction might actually lead somewhere, that this was not just movement for the sake of movement, but a path, however uncertain, toward something more than survival measured in minutes. The depression in the terrain deepened as Ethan Cole approached, the wind losing some of its edge along the slope as if the land itself was absorbing part of the storm, and he adjusted his footing carefully, descending at an angle to avoid slipping. Each step measured, each shift in weight deliberate as the snow thinned and the darker surface beneath began to show through in uneven patches. His HUD flickered again, power at 33%, the number holding steady for a moment longer than expected, and he knew the system was compensating, reallocating energy reserves in ways that would not last, buying him time at a cost he would eventually have to pay. He focused on the descent, keeping Lyra close against his chest, her warmth still present, still faintly increasing in a way that did not match the external conditions. And he could feel it more clearly now, not just through the sensors, but physically, a subtle heat pressing back against him, as if she was stabilizing from within. The ground leveled out at the base of the depression, forming a shallow basin that curved inward on three sides, the rock formations rising just enough to block the worst of the wind, creating a pocket where the storm moved above rather than through, the sound still loud, but less immediate, less consuming. Ethan stepped into that space and paused, scanning quickly, his visor adjusting to the slight change in visibility. And for the first time since leaving the ridge, the environment felt marginally controlled, not safe, but manageable. He lowered himself carefully, easing Lyra down onto a relatively flat section of exposed ground, the surface cold but solid, and he kept one arm around her as he shifted position, ensuring she remained supported, ensuring the heat transfer continued without interruption. His breathing was heavier now, each inhale drawn through the filtration system with a faint mechanical hiss, and he forced it back into rhythm, steady, controlled, because losing control now would cascade into everything else. Lyra's eyes opened again, more fully this time, the glow in them stronger, more defined, and she looked around the basin briefly before returning her gaze to him, as if confirming their location, as if recognizing something about this place that he did not. She spoke again, clearer than before, the tones more structured, the cadence deliberate, and his translator responded with a stronger flicker, fragments aligning for a second longer before breaking apart again. He caught a single concept this time, incomplete but distinct, something that resembled direction or destination, and he leaned slightly closer, instinctively trying to bridge the gap, even though he knew the system could not hold the connection. She lifted her hand slowly, the movement controlled despite her condition, and pointed toward the far edge of the basin, where the rock formation dipped slightly, forming a narrow opening that he had not immediately registered as significant. Ethan followed the gesture, his gaze narrowing as he adjusted the zoom on his visor, cutting through the interference just enough to see the outline more clearly, a darker line against the lighter stone, a break that suggested depth beyond the surface, not just a gap, but an entrance. His HUD attempted to scan it, the readings unstable but consistent enough to indicate a variation in temperature beyond, slightly higher than the surrounding environment, which meant insulation, which meant shelter, something more substantial than what they had used so far. He looked back at her, meeting her gaze again, and for the first time since finding her, there was a clear exchange of understanding between them, not through words, but through action and response, a simple alignment of intent. Power dropped again, 30% now, the margin tightening to a point where hesitation would no longer be an option, and he knew they had reached a threshold where every decision had to lead somewhere tangible. Ethan shifted his position, preparing to lift her again, but before he moved, her hand tightened slightly against his suit, not resisting, not stopping him, just holding for a fraction longer, and he paused, just briefly, acknowledging it without breaking focus. The storm roared above them, unseen but still present, and the basin held its fragile calm, a temporary refuge that would not last. He adjusted his grip once more, lifting her carefully, and turned toward the narrow opening she had indicated, the path ahead uncertain, but for the first time, not entirely unknown. The opening narrowed as Ethan Cole approached, the rock walls rising on either side like silent barriers carved by time rather than force, the wind losing its dominance with every step forward until it became a distant roar instead of a constant assault, and he adjusted his pace instinctively, slowing as visibility improved, the snow thinning into scattered patches that revealed a darker, compact surface beneath his boots. His HUD flickered again, power at 28%, the number lower than he wanted, but steady enough to confirm that the system had stabilized for the moment, reallocating what remained to essential functions while suppressing everything else. He kept Lyra close, her warmth now more noticeable, not just a faint anomaly, but a consistent presence, a subtle heat that seemed to respond to proximity, as if her body was regulating itself in ways his equipment could not fully measure. The entrance ahead resolved into a shallow tunnel, not perfectly natural, the edges too smooth in places, suggesting either erosion shaped by unusual forces or something older, something that had once been used. He did not pause to question it. He stepped inside. The shift was immediate. The wind dropped away almost completely, replaced by a stillness that felt almost unnatural after the storm. The air colder in a different way, less biting but heavier, enclosed, and his visor adjusted again, filtering out the last of the external glare to reveal the interior more clearly. The tunnel sloped downward at a gradual angle, the floor uneven but stable, and the walls reflected a faint sheen of frost that caught the limited light and scattered it in muted patterns. Ethan moved deeper, each step echoing softly in a way that reminded him just how quiet the space had become, and for the first time since the crash, he could hear something beyond the environment, a faint, rhythmic sound that did not belong to the storm or his own movement. He slowed, listening, isolating it through the filters, and realized it was coming from her. Not breathing. Something else. A soft pulse, almost like a frequency, steady and low, emanating from her core in a way that his suit began to register more clearly now that interference had dropped. He glanced down, adjusting the sensor focus, and the readings stabilized enough to form a pattern, not random, not biological in the way he understood, but structured, intentional, as if her body was generating a controlled output. The temperature around them rose slightly, just a few degrees, but enough to register as significant in an environment like this, and he felt it through the suit, a gradual easing of the cold that had been pressing against him since he stepped onto this planet. Lyra's eyes opened again, clearer than before, the glow within them stronger, more defined, and she looked at him with a level of awareness that had not been present earlier, as if crossing into this space had triggered something within her. She spoke again, the sound more stable now, the cadence smoother, and his translator responded immediately, the connection holding for longer this time as the system finally found enough consistency to begin processing. The words did not come through fully, not yet, but fragments aligned into something closer to meaning, and he caught a single phrase, incomplete but recognizable, something that resembled guidance or instruction directed at him. He did not respond with words. He nodded once, a simple acknowledgement, and continued forward, trusting the direction she had given him, trusting the path because there was no better alternative. The tunnel widened slightly ahead, opening into a chamber where the ceiling rose higher and the walls curved outward, creating a space that felt less like a passage and more like a destination. The ground here was almost entirely free of snow, the temperature noticeably higher, and his HUD confirmed it, a localized increase that could not be explained by external conditions alone. Power dropped again, 25%, but the rate had slowed, the system no longer fighting the storm, no longer compensating for constant exposure, and he understood immediately what that meant. They had found something real. Ethan stepped into the center of the chamber and lowered Lyra carefully onto the ground, maintaining contact as he adjusted the thermal pack. Though its output was now less critical, the environment itself providing a degree of stability they had not had before. He exhaled slowly, the sound steady, and for the first time since he had turned back, he allowed himself to pause without calculating the next step, because for this moment, at least, the world was not trying to take everything from them at once. The chamber held its silence like something deliberate, not empty, but waiting, the faint warmth lingering in the air as Ethan Cole adjusted his position beside Lyra, one knee against the dark ground, one hand still resting lightly near her shoulder, as if removing it too quickly might break whatever fragile balance they had finally reached. His HUD pulsed again, power at 23%, then held, the drain slower now, manageable, no longer racing against him, and for the first time the numbers felt like information instead of a countdown. He scanned the space again, slower this time, taking in the curved walls, the faint patterns beneath the frost that suggested something more than natural formation, lines too consistent, too intentional to be random, and he realized this was not just shelter, it was structure, something built or shaped with purpose long before he arrived. Lyra moved beside him, the motion controlled, more stable than before, and he turned his attention back to her as she pushed herself up slightly, her strength returning in small increments that his sensors confirmed with steady improvements in temperature and internal activity. Her eyes met his again, the glow within them now clear, steady, and she spoke once more, her voice no longer fragmented by the storm, the translator engaging fully this time, the signal clean enough to resolve into meaning. You came back. The words were simple, but they carried weight, not as a question, not even as surprise, but as acknowledgement, and Ethan held her gaze for a moment before responding, his voice steady, unembellished. Yeah. He did not explain. He did not justify. The reason had already been decided long before the words existed. She studied him for a second longer, as if measuring that answer against something internal, something deeper than language, and then she nodded once, a small, deliberate motion that seemed to settle something between them. The faint pulse he had been detecting from her grew slightly stronger, spreading outward in a controlled wave that his suit registered as a gradual increase in ambient temperature, localized but expanding, the chamber itself responding in subtle ways, the frost along the walls thinning, the air shifting just enough to confirm that whatever she was doing was not passive. Ethan watched the readings, processing the data, understanding now that she had not simply survived the storm, she had been interacting with it, with this place, in ways he could not replicate. This place, he started, then stopped, not sure how to frame the question in a way that made sense across species, but she seemed to understand anyway, her gaze moving briefly to the walls before returning to him. Safe, she said, the word precise, chosen, and then added, after a brief pause, for now. He nodded once, accepting that without pushing further, because temporary safety was more than enough given where they had come from. The power reading shifted again, 21%, and he knew he could not stay indefinitely, not without a plan beyond this chamber. But for the first time that thought did not feel immediate, did not demand action in the next second. Lyra shifted again, sitting more upright now, her movements steadier. And she looked at him with something that had fully replaced the earlier confusion, something clearer, something that resembled understanding. You should have left, she said quietly, not as an accusation, but as a statement of fact, something her world had likely taught her long before this moment. Ethan let out a slow breath, the sound soft in the stillness, and shook his head slightly. Maybe, he said, the word simple, unweighted, and then added, almost as an afterthought, but I didn't. She held his gaze for a long second after that, the silence between them no longer empty, but filled with something unspoken, something that did not need translation, and then she looked away, not in dismissal, but in acceptance. The chamber remained quiet, the storm outside reduced to a distant presence that no longer dictated every decision, and Ethan leaned back slightly against the curved wall, the tension in his posture easing just enough to acknowledge the moment without abandoning awareness. He did not know what came next. He did not know how long the shelter would hold, or what waited beyond the storm, or what her kind would do if they found him here with her. But for the first time since he had stepped onto this planet, those questions did not define him. The decision had already been made, and sometimes that was enough.